Thank you, Carla. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many good friends here. Thank you all for coming out. I'm going to read selections from each of my articles in the Grand Piano. And before I start, I'm going to read something, just a brief note that I made while doing this, putting this thing together, about how I'm thinking about the Grand Piano right now. As I see it now, the Grand Piano is an exercise in superimposition of time frames. The period covered, 1975 to 1980, plus lots of details from both before and after. The period of the writing, roughly 2000 to 2010, and the period of this current project, July 2022 to July 2023. One might add the periodicity of the text, that is, the rhythm and duration of sentences, paragraphs, and sections, as well as that of reception, the pace of acquisition, reading, and commentary, including this zoom. This multi-layered temporal complex demonstrates the idea that time, per se, does not exist. Rather, it is a construction made up of multiple instants, frames, and points of view. For me, the meaning of the Grand Piano is not simply a hearkening back, but also a spontaneous reimagining, a new beginning whose end is yet to be determined. One more thing to note. Looking back, I feel like I'm not the same guy who did those things in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I'm not even the same guy who wrote those things in the 2000s. People change. Or do they only stand more revealed? Looking at my Grand Piano entries, I start to see the narrator as a kind of fictional character. Not about love. According to Victor Shklovsky, in order to write about love, one must write about everything not about love. One night in September 1971, two men in their early 20s sit at a kitchen table in a house on 25th Street in Noe Valley. They take turns typing on an Olympia manual typewriter. They stay up until around 3 a.m. They write 7 poems, the concept of the good. They hit on a common but not a private language that will continue to develop through correspondence, at first mostly postcards, later email, a series of collaborations over the course of the next 30 years. For 3 or 4 months in the summer and fall of 1974, he lives in New York City, first crashing at a gutted former bordello on the southeast corner of 8th Avenue and 20th Street, where a number of Yale alumni were staying. A few thin foam pads, the only furnishings, ripped leather jackets, the preferred attire, meals taken at the Cuban Chinese restaurants on 8th Avenue, Mi Chinita, Fortuna China, and others. Then later, on East 28th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues, a 5th floor walk-up tenement occupied by mostly Chinese people. The electricity is DC, so the radio won't work, and there is no hot water. During this time, he finds work through Bob Withers, a friend from Yale. First, he gets proofreading jobs with Maurice Gerodius of Olympia Press, including a sci-fi series by Howard Rheingold, later to become a popular cyber journalist. Then he goes to work at D.A. Pennebaker's studio in Midtown, where Bob Withers is an assistant. There he repairs sprocket holes on circulating copies of films like Monterey Pop, while Pennebaker reviews rushes from his current project on David Bowie. He checks into St. Mark's once or twice, hears Bernadette Mayer read, but for whatever reason keeps his distance from the scene. New York is so loud, the social chaos of the time and place seem to require a bold-faced simplicity, and his work feels too indirect, too elliptical to show up there. Returning to San Francisco, he finds himself in relationship hell, a triangle whose other man, a Marxist intellectual and auto mechanic, says, "I'm too old for this shit." Next, he moves into a basement apartment on Day Street at the foot of Red Rock in the outer reaches of Noe Valley. He's reading Vico's New Science, Levi-Strauss's From Honey to Ashes, and Genoa by Paul Metcalf. He adopts a collage method of prose-embedded fragments from reading and life. He begins the resulting sequence, Entropica. He reads the resulting sequence, Entropica, at Intersection in North Beach. Aware of the intractable quality of the work, its refusal of the more expressive approach that had characterized his earlier writing, he feels a kind of defiance, a take it or leave it attitude in his delivery to a live audience. Afterwards, Jack Hirschman gives him some words of encouragement. He hasn't forgotten that. Splish splash, I was Jim Jones, Iggy Pop. I remember going to a 4th of July party with Alan Bernheimer and Alex Smith. We dressed for the occasion, Alan in all blue, Alex in all white, and I in all red. I remember when Meryl Gilfillan worked at Doggy Diner on Market Street. The blue machine embroidered name tag on his white short sleeve shirt said Gil. I remember counting my addresses in San Francisco. There were 14 in all: 28th Street, 25th Street, Collingwood Street, Valencia Street, Army Street, 16th Street, Hartford Street, Bryant Street, Shotwell Street, Missouri Street, Day Street, San Jose Avenue, and later Cap Street. That's only 13. I remember Barry taught me to cook Chinese. Ron was writing Ketchak in the other room. I remember snow in San Francisco, Christmas 1974. I remember working at the Oakland Bulk Mail Center at 3 a.m. After work at the Oakland Bulk Mail Center at 3 a.m., riding my bike from Potrero Hill to the Haight to visit Lucy Rideout. I remember driving down through Baja, California with Ani. It was too cold in Mulegé, so we continued on to La Paz, where I wrote Camera Obscura, a capsule summary of human history. The cave people come out of the cave with their cameras. I remember Ani walking across the salt flats at Guerrero Negro, wearing a green silk Chinese jacket, a loose cotton skirt, and Birkenstocks, wind blowing her mass of curls, a bottle of beer in her hand. I remember July 4, 1976, the bicentennial. Barry, my brother Nick, and I were with Carla and Steve on the roof of an apartment building on Wilshire Boulevard. We watched in grim fascination as the LAPD motorcycle battalion executed fancy maneuvers in formation on the Miracle Mile. I remember walking with Bob and others on a steep San Francisco hill with cars parked nose to the curb. Bob wondered aloud, if we tipped the first car over, would the rest flip over like dominoes? I remember the first time I saw Lynn. She was reading at the grand piano. She had straight, light brown hair and a nice smile. She was wearing a short jacket with light brown suede panels and seemed very self-confident and Western. I remember Jonestown. 10 days later, getting off a plane in New York for my first ever reading at St. Mark's Church, I heard the news that George Moscone and Harvey Milk had been shot. I remember when I was poet in residence at Mission High School. One time in the boys' room, a guy did a line of coke on top of the urinal next to me. I remember doing legal proofreading with John Clark for Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison on the 26th floor of One Market Plaza. There was an earthquake. A houseplant waved violently back and forth. John and I just sat there in silence and looked at each other. I remember when Steve Pantos hired me as a reporter for Snedegar Jury Research. I had my own glass-walled office in the Orpheum building with a window on Market Street. I taped phone interviews with lawyers and wrote reports for Snedegar's Jury Weekly and Snedegar's Arbitration Journal. Once old man Snedegar, observing me at my desk, asked Steve, "Why isn't he working?" October song. I'll sing you this October song, for there is no song before it. The words and tune are none of my own, for my joys and sorrows bore it. For judges like to lay down laws, and rebels like to break them, and the poor priests like to walk in chains, and God likes to forsake them. The Incredible String Band, as many of you will remember. What were the rules of the game, and what would it mean to break them? As a young man, I was driven relentlessly, if not consciously, by such questions. My college career was marked by a series of violations. Freshman year, caught at 3 a.m. with a girl in my room, I was banned from the dorm and dining hall for 2 weeks, a late instance of the college's quaint punitive practice of rustication. Sophomore year, I was suspended with a group of 47 students for occupying the office of the head of dining halls in a political adventure organized by campus leftists, including Barney Rubin, in defense of a dining hall worker who had been fired after throwing a dish of Jell-O in the face of a student manager during a work speed up. Junior year was the revolution. While students on college campuses across the country turned out to protest the bombing of Cambodia, at Yale we struck in support of Bobby Seale, Erica Huggins, and 9 New Haven area Black Panthers arrested for murder of suspected FBI informant Alex Rackley. On May Day 1970, some 30,000 people descended on New Haven and occupied the green between the college and the town. The National Guard dispersed the crowd with tear gas. On a platform in the old campus quadrangle, Allen Ginsberg sat cross-legged, chanting "Om" as the fleeing crowd of demonstrators streamed past. Classes were suspended for the term. Senior year, the custodial and dining hall workers went out on strike. There were acts of minor sabotage and skirmishes with campus police. Wittgenstein had sought to cut the Gordian knot of philosophy by describing thought in terms of language games. Now the rules of the game were up for grabs. One's success or failure depended on which game one was playing. The invincible logic of American capitalism had led straight to Vietnam. Everyone became suddenly aware of how behavior patterns had been determined by factors of birth, race, and class. What were the rules of poetry, and what would it mean to break them? Poetry was a way to assert autonomy through a drastic reduction in scale. The scale and pace of world events was terrifying and out of control. The poem stood apart. A community began to form around the poem. Back in San Francisco, I figured I'd better settle down and find myself a career. In 1975, I enrolled in the secondary school teaching credential program at San Francisco State. For some reason, I elected an experimental team teaching track based on Rogerian psychology. This proved to be a mistake. I remember a trust walk, blindfolded in front of the student union building, holding a classmate's hand. The conception was to open oneself up, to achieve a kind of receptivity that would nurture student development. I was appalled by the lack of attention to specific content of any kind. After a month or so, while riding BART, I picked up a classified ad for a class on how to take the post office entrance exam. At the class, I learned how to fill in the round blanks on standardized tests with a single outward spiraling pencil stroke for maximum speed and efficiency. The method worked. I quit graduate school and went to work at the Oakland Bulk Mail Center and entered an 89-day appointment as non-union clerk casual, laid on for the Christmas postal rush. The landscape of the post office was industrial and intense. I worked the swing shift from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. and got a ride from the city with a guy in a Mazda sports car. Bob Marley's Night Shift was my mental soundtrack. The work involved standing before a moving conveyor belt, grabbing packages and tossing them to sacks on racks marked by city and zip code. When a bag filled up, one had to unhook it, pull it closed, drag it to the designated hole in the floor and drop it down the chute to where another belt would presumably send it on its appointed way. The floor was vast, with many sets of belts and racks and many coworkers within eyeshot. Occasionally, I was sent downstairs to the docks to help load or unload trucks. The visually fabulous work environment, the late hours, the immersion in blue-collar life, the physical demands of the job, combined with the absence of any and all possible mental constraints imposed by more intellectual work, my mind was free. I had also deferred career decisions to another day and kept open my commitment to job numero uno, poetry. But it would not be until 2 years later that I would mine the specific content of the Bulk Mail Center as material for my books. Ted Berrigan liked Pepsi and he liked donuts. Once in New Haven, several of us walked with Ted and Bill Berkson to a Dunkin' Donuts near the railroad station. The station was a mile or so from campus, and in those days we always walked it. We never took cabs. I suspect Ted discovered the Dunkin' Donuts that way, walking. It was night, so no one said anything while we walked. And no one said anything while we walked. Even at the counter, the conversation was perfunctory. It was my first experience of Ted being quiet. Some years later, Ted was staying at my house in Oakland, a different time from the stay I mentioned earlier. He, Steve, and I walked over to the nearby Winchell's Donuts on Alcatraz and Shattuck. On the way back, Ted noticed an iron grill of vertical bars covering the boarded up window in the side of the corner grocery. Ted observed that one bar was longer than the rest, protruding out at the bottom of the grill for no apparent reason. For years afterward, whenever I drove past that window, I thought of Ted. When we got back to my place, we stood around in the front yard, smoked a joint, and had an exciting and serious conversation about poetry. We all three felt that we had had some profound insights as we stood there beneath the night sky of Oakland. Finally, we went back into the house. The next morning, Lynn and I had Ted on our radio program, In the American Tree, New Writing by Poets, at KPFA Studios on Shattuck Avenue in downtown Berkeley. Lynn and I had been doing the show for a while, but on the scale of professional broadcasters, we were strictly amateurs. Airtime is intense. You're in a glass room being listened to by an unknown but presumably large number of unseen people. Ted and I were on speed. By the time the engineer signaled that we were on the air, my mind was racing and I had trouble affecting a normal conversational tone of voice. Ted, on the other hand, seemed to relax into a casual, deliberative manner and calm, unhurried pace. Around this time, someone, I'm not sure who, hooked up with John Green, a former light show artist for the San Francisco psychedelic bands, and the brother of Tinker Green, whom we had met through the poet Erica Hunt. John was manager of Studio Eremos, a small theater in Project Artaud. Between 1980 and 1982, a series of plays were produced there, written by poets, performed by poets and friends, directed by Nick and Eileen, with sets designed by Eileen, Francie Shaw, Johanna Drucker, and others, and lighting by John Green, Michael Bush, Diane Hall, and Jean Day. Typical runs were 2 or 3 weekends. The theater seated about 75, and as word got around, sellouts were not uncommon. My first role was in Carla's Third Man, 1980, where I appeared with the musician and performance artist Greg Goodman as one of a pair of characters named Man and Man. Greg and I stood side by side and delivered our lines while putting on neckties. In Bob's The Alps, 1982, I played teacher, a meteor role that required me to memorize quite a few lines and afforded me the opportunity to more thoroughly inhabit a character, in this case, an authoritarian one. Jean Day, who played student, told me at one point that when she approached me on stage, she was actually intimidated. In Alan Bernheimer's Particle Arms, 1982, I achieved perhaps my most fully realized role, the creepy insect-like bellhop, fictitious doe, against Stephen Rotifer's corpulent, overbearing desk clerk, Liguris. In his direction of both The Alps and Particle Arms, Nick put the players through their paces in regular rehearsals that typically began with physical and speech exercises. Repeat rapidly, red leather, yellow leather, and old Tolstoy's cow, and evolved through improvisational exercises to blocking and full scene rehearsal. The Alps was produced on a double bill with my play directed by Eileen, Collateral, directed by Eileen. Here is how Collateral was written. I did not sit down to write a play. At the time, I was writing prose works in notebooks that blurred the lines between theory, poem, and personal journal. Some of this writing appeared as prose works and American paragraphs and A Sentimental Journey in my book Windows, 1985. To compose a play, I tried to identify different voices in various fragments of prose, assigned character to each voice, rearranged the fragments to form dialogue, and deployed dialogue to create scenes. For example, the two main characters, Belle and Lopez, played by Nick and Stephen Rotifer, respectively, are characterized by extravagant exuberance, Belle, and crabby skepticism, Lopez. I was aware that these two personae represented aspects of my own personality, but that was neither here nor there. I wanted a constructivist theater, not a psychological one. My model was Stanislavski, not Stanislavski, but Meyerhold. What I was after was not intimacy, but a kind of suspension of characters in time and in relation to each other as evidence of the recombinatory power of the imagination. The characters in Collateral are presented on a last name only basis. They introduce themselves by name in the opening scene. There is no plot, no exposition, no context, and precious little to grab hold of. There are 40 numbered scenes ranging from brief dialogues to cryptic one-liners like Litmus Seti Bodega Hamlet or Blossom Harping Vitamin. The skies over Berkeley, apparently most of the rest of Northern California have been overcast for a week now due to thousands of wildfires burning all over the state. They will be contained. When they will be contained is anyone's guess, and we're being told on TV to expect smoky air indefinitely. At first, you could smell it, but yesterday and today the wind is from the west, blowing fog in from the bay, so it's pleasant here. While in Big Sur and elsewhere, the fires rage on. Like the California wildfires, the conditions of the 70s shared by everyone who was there, one way or the other. In their fragmentation, those conditions were what we were given, as were the various limits defined from without on what could be written or said. Some writing in the 70s could be said to have tested those limits, even as it testified to them. Limits are what any of us are inside of, wrote Charles Olson, but immediately one thinks of Larry Eigner, the heroic accomplishment of his writing against the limits of near quadriplegia. In our youth, we seek to identify ourselves and each other through an often painful recognition and sometimes joyous celebration of difference. Later, identity appears to be simply that which could not be otherwise. You didn't even try, as Philip Whalen put it. A series of events, decisions, and actions combine to define the individual, the company one keeps, the music one listens to, the work one does, the art one makes. In this sense, writing toward the horizon of language is not simply an assault on the politics of identity, it is as much an expression of identity and its messy prerequisite community as the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you wear your hat, the way you sip your tea. Development. At PeopleSoft in the late 90s, the software engineers called developers were divided into two groups, applications and technology. The apps guys, gals included, wrote software products to automate big company processes like payroll and accounting. The technology dudes wrote the building blocks, a tool set called People Tools, and were responsible for software architecture, which at the time was moving from 2-tier to 3-tier client-server platforms, as well as application performance on all the leading database programs, Oracle, Sybase, Informix, IBM, Microsoft, operating systems, Unix, Windows, and server hardware, Sun, DEC, HP, IBM, Compaq. Each major product release was built in two phases. First, the technology, then the applications. This division of labor, it occurred to me, is mirrored in the realm of language and by extension, literature. By analogy, apps correspond to Saussure's parole, and tech is like langue, speech, voice, person, story, message, drama, thought, song, language, syntax, semantics, phonetics, dynamics, environment, silence, noise. In software parlance, language is the platform, speech, the application. In this sense, the language writers step down into the infrastructure of the poem. Rather than packaged applications designed to carry out designated tasks, their works were made to be reassembled by users, that is, by readers who now acted as collaborators in constructing the meanings of the text. For the first generation language poets, who called themselves language writers, never language poets, the infrastructure space was the interesting place. There were political reasons for this. Government war propaganda and a lot else had caused them to doubt the value of so-called plain speech. To speak is to lie. Beyond that healthy skepticism, they shared a general sense of excitement about doing something new. That sense of possibility was a huge motivator. It engendered a feeling for life as possibility, which is in fact what life is. They did not anticipate all the uses to which their work would be put by later waves of poets for whom language writing would serve as a technical platform for writing that also embraced narrative, character, identity, politics, satire, drama. The experiments in writing that took place in San Francisco in the 70s paralleled the rise of Silicon Valley to the south. Both enterprises, language was broken down into its component parts, which in turn were reassembled to create new possibilities. We knew nothing about that. When Alan Bernheimer hired me at Computerland in 1983, I had never seen a personal computer. In fact, at 33, I had never held a full-time job. Notes toward a phenomenology of time. Even if I say I have lived or I shall live, it's present because I'm saying it now. Clarice Lispector. Memoir is duplicative territory. There is a huge and perfectly natural tendency toward the sedimentary. In George Perec's W, or Memory of Childhood, two texts alternate. One, an adolescent fantasy of a quasi-fascist state culture based on athletic competition. The other, a documentary investigation into the fragmentary evidence of Perec's childhood, a series of displacements occasioned by the Holocaust. In this book, Perec poses the dilemma of autobiography. All memory is suspect, being a construct of the present. Consistency, coherence, and narrative unity are attributes of the fantastic. The rigorous approach to the past limits itself to fragments. Memoir stretches between the twin poles of pure fiction and mute fact. I remember certain moments, the most embarrassing or tragic, the fateful, the triumphant, the tender. Also, occasional odd or random ones. A year or so after my graduation from elementary school, I went back for some reason and found myself walking through the empty hallway thinking about time. I decided to remember this moment for no other reason than as an experiment, like putting a bookmark in time. Research at the Max Planck Institute of Quantum Optics say that time may not exist at the most fundamental level of physical reality. What's more, the laws of physics don't explain how time always points to the future. All the laws, whether Newton's, Einstein's, or quantum mechanics, would work equally well if time ran backward. In March 1955, when his lifelong friend Michel Besso died, Einstein wrote a letter consoling Besso's family. Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us, who believe in physics, know the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. If Walter Benjamin had survived his crossing of the French border to Spain, he might have ended up in Hollywood with Brecht, Long, Schoenberg, Marcuse, and Wilder. What grist might he have found in the terminal image archive that is Los Angeles? But fate, for such is the name that we give the infinite and unceasing operations of thousands of intertwined causes, would not have it. Jorge Luis Borges. Nietzsche said that a tree is a new thing at every instant. We affirm the form because we do not seize the subtlety of an absolute moment. Nietzsche, as cited in Roland Barthes, as quoted by Ann Tardos in IMU. Benjamin wrote of the Jewish tradition that each moment may signify the arrival of the Messiah, so that history is shot through with chips of messianic time. Speaking of which, okay. And finally, I'll just read excerpts from the last section of my last piece in here, which is called Timeline. 1980, everything that rests is negligence. Mugabe elected in Zimbabwe. The taxonomy of instance restyles the terminal rest. You are dysfunctioning at a high level. You'd love to go to England, and you do. That sexual feeling gives you head. The whole way to Brennan's, you pedal hard. It's raining by the time you get back. You spot a sail, sight narrows to a thin slice of arc. You offer flimsy comments, wholesale. Water in summer, rake wet leaves in winter. Mariel boatlift from Cuba. The way ahead is across the water. A wave tips you forward into the light. The elements of living add up to the fleeting moment. Downstairs at city lights. You do not chicken, you do not cop out. Concentrative attention, bring some. Your pastoral ancestry binds you to the seasons, turning the great wheel of the year. You sweat under cover of darkness and cry salt tears. The family assembles for music videos on black and white TV. Richard Pryor burned while freebasing. Traditional poetry upholds the mirror of time. You get it, but you don't keep it around. Siren song of biology lifts you hence. A yellow star shines bright in a paper sky. Each call is recorded at an office in the Orpheum building. You are predisposed toward the empty reaches of the Great Plains. Somber shadows lean against a spattered wall. You exercise restraint the way dog owners walk their dogs. When obstacles arise, you go right through them. Solidarity Union wins shipyard strike in Gdansk. The chairs fill up with truth-seeking mystery guests, all eyes and ears. You stand like a bull in a china shop. Water jets up to signal general fluidity. There has to be something on the other side, or is it simply another transition? You get a library card and haunt the stacks at Cal. What is the market for the present moment? You are the difference between your education and what you are laying down. What you are doing is not, strictly speaking, your own. Inderal cures you of migraine in Cincinnati. Reagan elected. You and she play foursquare on the sidewalk. The enigmatic resists resolution in favor of mystery books. You prefer slop, displaced by the time it gets dark. Opportunities abound if only you will step out into them. Telegraph Avenue under a light rain. Everything that happens forms a continuum. Changes of direction lie latent at the stress points. Imagine lives going on as usual, dark houses lit from inside. John Lennon shot. You shed a tear in front of the TV, your mind aghast at simplicity. At a bar with some friends, you converse in the language of decay. At home, you have a sofa and a few chairs. The conditions of your association are works made of hand of mouth. You sell your car to yourself under an assumed name. As easy as living, bats chirp above Bushrod Park. At dusk, a light breeze teases the upper branches. Your true feelings are always available, even in a clinch. Written down is placed outside. That's it. Hi, Chris.
Hi, everybody. So it's great to see everybody here. And Kit, thank you for the really immersive reading. I want to suggest that everybody go to gallery mode. And also you can, to ask questions, you can raise your hand or put something in the chat. I already see something in the chat, but give yourself a bit of time to think about the questions. And so after about 12 to 15 minutes, I'm going to, the hosts will stop the recording. So we have a kind of limited time frame for the questions. And so just, you know, I'm just really looking forward to this engagement, and I'm going to now see if there are hands up. I can see that there's a really wonderful question by Joe Safdie in the chat. So maybe, can we start with that? Is that okay with you, Joe?
Yes, fine.
Great. Okay. Do you want to read it?
Well, sure. With one addendum, I think that there were moments in Kit's reading, which I really enjoyed, Kit. Thank you. That answer my question. but anyway, I'll ask it anyway. I wonder what you see as the connections between autobiographical writing and the writing that this community of practice, which is Ted Pearson's term, is more known for. Could it be to undermine autobiography, as in your beginning comment, that people change?
Right. Well, you know, when as I looked at your comment, the first thing that popped into my mind was that the fact of the community of practice that is the grand piano group was totally instrumental in these autobiographical writings even happening at all. And further, it really shaped them because we were sharing these things with each other the whole way along and reviewing them, commenting on them, critiquing them. So it really was a collaborative process in that respect. But to your question about undermining, I guess what you're saying is, maybe what you're saying is that a lot of writing was autobiographical back in those days in the poetry world. And the so-called language writers seem to be saying that that's not what we want to do. And I guess that's the case, although where do you get your works? Where do you get your inspiration? Where, you know, I mean, the boundary between life and writing is not so impermeable. But yeah, I mean, I think part of the difference is that by the 2000s, we had all lived for a while, and we were able to look back on a period that was, you know, rather chaotic, and we were so in it at that time, totally in it. Maybe the fact of how in it we were allowed us to be so freewheeling with language and to move away from a more, you know, autobiographical type mode. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
Well, listen, it's your show, and as I say, I liked it. I remember a line from Barry, though, which I have had occasion to use, and the line was, "Start writing autobiography." And as I remember, Barry, that was rather sarcastic in context. So, you know, I just wanted to know, you know, the intersections of the two, really.
It was like Kit going to work at the post office. You know, go get a life. And it's interesting. I think there's this wonderful way in which there's something accelerates when you go to work at the post office. It really does. It's a very interesting crux of your presentation. And there was this one sentence that described how things went down the chute. You know, that you could do that in poetry, but you can really only do that in a prose sentence. You know, where the way the sentence works syntactically is the way that the package goes down the chute. And I thought that was a wonderful moment of why prose is working so well, you know, in this project.
I might have been reading, I believe I was reading Bolaño at the time that we were doing this. And I was really inspired by his prose style. I don't know if that particular part, you know, about the post office was affected by that, but some of the other ones were.
More questions?
You know, I really like, one of my favorite autobiographies is Kenneth Rexroth's autobiographical novel, which if you haven't read it, it's like an unbelievable book. It's really, really great. And apparently the title had to do with the fact that the publisher didn't want to get sued because there's a lot of name dropping and a lot of outrageous behavior that occurs in the book. But it also may be that, you know, it was kind of a mix of memoir and fiction because the story of his life is really incredible.
What's the name of that, Kit? Do you know?
An autobiographical novel.
That's the title. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I have a question. You ask, what are the rules of poetry and what does it mean to break them now? So what about now? Like now? What are the rules of poetry and what does it mean to break them now? Or is that a relevant question?
Well, I mean, I think that was that was sort of how I was maybe how I was thinking at that time. Poetry was still kind of new to me in a way.
I'll come back.
But I did want to break the rules. I'm not sure that I really feel that way now. But I do still feel like I want to get away from the last thing I just did.
That makes great sense.
Yeah.
Well, if I can comment on that, just the great motivation when you're young is to be different. Because the way to be an individual is to be different. And so the desire to break the rules, anything you would hope that anything you do breaks the rules. So for example, if you write a rhymed sonnet at that point, you have to think in your mind of a way in which you're breaking another set of rules. Otherwise you can't write it, because you can't create space for yourself that way, which is the great and most difficult thing to do in a world that's full by definition. I thought your reading was great, kid.
Thank you, Tom.
There's oh, go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, David has his hand up. I noticed it's been up.
David.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, I just wanted to actually follow up on something that Joe said about autobiography and technique, and it was just reminded. By the way, Kit, fantastic reading. I just really enjoyed it. I came in a little late, but it was wonderful, wonderful. Somewhere I can't remember if it was an interview or an essay, but Rosemary Waldrop talks about using philosophical source text for some for like Wittgenstein for her poetry as a way of getting past writing about her mother. And then when she goes back and looks at the work, she's like, oh, they're still about my mother, you know. And so like I think anyway, it seemed to have some relevance to what we were talking about.
My mother loved it.
My mom wasn't into Wittgenstein.
I said that first, kid.
Oh, who said that?
I did. I said my mother loved Wittgenstein. My mother never heard of it. But she did because he was.
Eating over
she
your
was
mother's
Austrian. Well, she loved all
Stephen, did you
Viennese.
have your hand up? Stephen
Yeah.
Radcliffe.
Oh, yeah, I just, I'm noticing, looking at this grid of faces on the two screens, or screen and a half, and thinking about one of the notes I took when Kit was reading. A community began to form itself around the poem. It's quite remarkable because there is this community. Every month now, we're getting together and doing this, and it's, you know, gone on for a long time. It's quite, it's moving. Great reading, Kit.
Thanks, Steve.
That was wonderful. Thank you. There's a question, or there's a comment from David Lau. David, do you want to make the comment? I think it's interesting for the present, you know, question about the present. Maybe he's not here now.
Oh, hi guys. I'm
Oh, hi,
cooking. Can you
great.
hear me okay, Carla?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Sorry, I'm like it's only like 5 something here on the West Coast, so trying to get dinner on the table. Yeah, I just responding to that idea of what it would mean to break the rules or challenge the rules now. I mean, I think it's still in a way the same old problem of a dominant kind of autobiographical poetry, and that's even, you know, now kind of cross-pollinated by a publishing industry that's hungry for, you know, I don't know, low stakes memoirs, to put it kindly. And then there's like all this auto fiction kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, so I think that that's still got to be challenged. Obviously, there's a certain kind of liberalism, NPR liberalism too, as an ideology that's really strong in all of that stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Imagination.
On a couple of counts, like I was surprised, Kit, when you said, I mean, you want to leave what you did before, but it seems like disruption and is still an important part of the art project. As much as it was then, it remains, at least for me. And I would also agree that Alexis asked, what do you mean by low stakes memoirs? And I'm not sure exactly what you mean. You would have to answer, David, but certainly autobiography as identity is overwhelming at this point too. So, but within those two, if you want to call them opposites, I've always felt about the language community or people writing that no matter how far you stray or try to stray from autobiography, the voice is you, if I can say that. And so I've always felt that I could close my eyes and I would still know who is the poet,
Or just read the work and know who it is.
Exactly. So there was a kind of disavowal of self, but I'm still very committed to, discovery and rupture and a new way to think about the world and about language. So I think it's always, the atomacy of one or the other is maybe a problematic, and that kind of mesh or mix and looking for new ways to combine those things or to ignore them and find something that like you said, it reveals itself anyway. Anyway, I just thought.
Can I add a comment to that? Which, in some sense, anybody who starts writing is looking for a way to write and a product of that effort that is distinguishable and individual, actually, not just distinguishable from anybody else, but utterly individual, utterly solo. And that can't possibly be divorced from autobiography. So Perec, just thinking about at random, Perec writes, it sits on the sensual piece and tries to extract every possible fact about it over a period of a weekend, writing nothing about himself. It's completely autobiography. It can't fail to be. And in that sense, that's one of the reasons why the Grand Piano Project appealed to me, because it was like a coming out, from a protection against the idea of autobiography and doing it in a new way, completely new way. And I think sometimes it succeeds. Like other work by good writers, sometimes it succeeds. Yeah.
So I want, that's a terrific sort of dialogue, some kind of tension there, and I'm wondering as we were about to close, that David Kellogg, and Kip, maybe you could sort of have the last word on this, writes, one thing that, as I see it, differentiates the Grand Piano Project, and perhaps particularly West Coast language poetry, from other groups or projects is the persistence of community across time, which I also think about in terms of how Kit described collaboration. The GP project does not reduce to individualism. So Kit, do you want to chime in on these there's like several different angles that are, focusing on this.
Yeah, I mean,
center.
Well, I like not reducing things to individualism, as individualism is like a scourge. It's a global scourge. I mean, people are who they are in relation to other people. And I think this project is sort of an example of that. It's part of what's wrong with America, is that a lot of the ideology is based on, the individual. And we get these ridiculous individuals who end up like, calling the shots and running things, so, yeah, I mean, I think the collective enterprise of this project is a good example. And it could those kinds of things happen in all walks of life, not just writing or not just art.
Thank you. That's a great way to end this.
Can I ask that
episode.
David be heard from too? David Lau actually had something he wanted to comment.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I
One more,
had to
yeah.
leave David, do you want to chime in here?
I don't know, Barry, that was a pretty good comment from Kit, so.
Okay.
I don't know if I
mean-
want to say anything.
Okay, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
We'll talk about it later. How about that?
All right.